has policies on the treatment of LGBT people by police. So, I mean, I think that we're starting to make headway there as well. That's just general advocacy, and that's with communities and grassroots support working on that too.
Absolutely. And I know moderators aren't supposed to insert themselves, but I'm going to take liberty of doing that. So bringing this all together and showing how it all works, Betty Beth Glenn's case against the state of Georgia that Lambda Legal litigated, she's a trans woman, she transitioned on the job, she worked at the state capitol. They told her, oh yeah, we told you it was okay, but the people don't like you and you're making them uncomfortable, so you gotta go. Lambda Legal jumped into it. I was working with Lambda Legal during that time as a community educator, traveled all across the South letting folks know about the case. Several years later, I ran for the legislature, first out Black lesbian to be elected in a state house in the country. And Vandy got her job back, so then it was Vandy and I, and I would always see her and high-five her and give her hugs, and all the legislators are looking around. And because of that particular case, I was also able to hire a transgender woman to be my legislative aide. She was so good at the job that she did that the Republicans got her hired on the state level. Most people don't know that. Chanel Haley, she was the first out Black trans woman to be to receive a job at the state capitol. And all of the Tea Party folks came to me and said, do you have another person like Chanel that you can bring in and to help us? So just to illustrate how all of the hard work you all are doing, we don't often hear about it in the media, but once again, y'all, we are winning in the South. It is absolutely taking place.
And not just because of lawyers and cases too, frankly, because of movements, right. And people who are non-lawyers, like people with Black Lives Matter, who have been taking these police departments to task, and people like Donald Trump, and really showing people that our communities are resilient. Our communities have always existed for before Caitlyn Jenner came out and was doing news specials. We have been here. We have been fighting. We will continue to fight, and we will win.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of you guys in the audience should give yourselves a round of applause.
Yeah. Ooh, we lined it up a little bit. What was you saying? What do you want? Yep, absolutely. So we're going to talk about what are some of the interventions that the attorneys and advocates have been making to address the problems of trans people, of what they face in custody. So again, how are we winning these particular situations?
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Passion Star case. I've alluded to much of it already, so I'll be brief in terms of the background, but I'll just say that we decided to bring this case in Texas because it's a documented fact that Texas has some of the highest rates of sexual assault and abuse in the nation among incarceration, among the nation's prisons. And I have some statistics, but I won't cite them, just take my word for it. And so despite their abysmal record on this particular issue, in 2014, Governor Perry, then Governor Perry, essentially decided to give the one-finger salute to the PREA requirements and told DOJ, we're not going to do this because we're Texas and we just do what we want to do. So we're going to continue doing our own thing over here to combat this issue, which obviously wasn't working, and your PREA thing, we're just going to ignore that. So based on that, we decided, okay, we need to bring a lawsuit in Texas. So we started looking through all of the requests for help that we get from Texas, and we came upon the Passion Star case. And we decided to file a lawsuit on her behalf. So we filed that lawsuit in October of 2015. For all the reasons we talked about earlier, Passion's identity as a Black transgender woman not only put her at increased risk of being swept up in the criminal justice system to begin with, but also of experiencing sexual abuse while she was incarcerated. So Passion's been in prison since 2002, and She was sentenced to 20 years, and she's been moved from male prison to male prison. We intervened on her behalf, and we filed a complaint, and then very shortly thereafter, we filed an emergency TRO to get her moved to a program called Safekeeping that TDCJ has, because her life was her life was in danger. I mean, she would call us saying, I don't know if I'm going to live till tomorrow morning. So we filed this TRO, and they did move her to safekeeping, thankfully. And the safekeeping program is a living arrangement where vulnerable prisoners can live separated from those who would prey on them. And unlike ADSEG or isolation, they're not in isolation. They get to have jobs, they get to participate in all the programs that they're supposed to participate in. It's not a panacea, it's not perfect, but since Passion has been in safekeeping, her whole affect is completely different. I mean, when we talk to her now, when I went to visit her not long ago, her whole just way of being is so different now that she's not just living survival from moment to moment, wondering if she's gonna make it till the next day. So that was a significant victory for us in that case. Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit too, in addition to the, I'll just move this so I can see what's going on back here. In addition to the lawsuit, which is an 8th Amendment cruel and unusual punishment lawsuit, kind of citing PREA to make the case that, you know, this is something that's known about, this is a risk. Congress did something many, many years ago to try to combat this. Texas is still not falling in line, and in so doing, they are violating Passion's constitutional rights under the 8th Amendment. You know, I just wanted to highlight, and Passion has been an amazing advocate for herself. I mean, before we ever came on, I mean, she'd filed reams upon reams of complaints with TDCJ. She'd gone before there were, you know, safety boards millions of times, seems, asking them, you need to protect me. I mean, in November of 2013, she went before them and said, there's someone who's threatening me. Please move me away from this person. They said, no, unsubstantiated, go back. They moved her even closer to this person. Like a few days after that, this person slashed her in the face with a razor. So she had to get 38 stitches, and she now has permanent scars on her face because they refused to help her and to move her. You know, we filed a lawsuit on her behalf. She was moved to safekeeping. In addition to the lawsuit, we launched a PREA campaign to kind of educate the public about this issue. And so, you know, this is just one of the things. After PREA, after Rick Perry, who was Texas's governor back in 2014, decided he wouldn't comply with PREA, leading up to the 2015 deadline for Texas to certify that they would comply with PREA, we launched a petition that was signed by 10,000 people across the country, which we delivered to then now Governor Abbott, saying you need to do your job, you need to certify that you're going to comply with PREA, and you need to actually then work to comply with PREA. So we delivered it to him days before the deadline. After we delivered it to him, he certified to DOJ that Texas would work to come to compliance with PREA wherever feasible, which is certainly better than what Perry did, but it's certainly still not satisfactory to us. I mean, wherever feasible is an exception that you could probably drive a truck through, and they're still not complying with their obligations, as we know. So this was part of the campaign. We also had a Compassion for Passion component where folks could send notes of support to Passion. I want to just go back. That's Passion's actual handwriting up there from one of the many letters that she had. I kind of wanted to include that to kind of bring her personally into the space. It says, safety from rape and assault is not a privilege, it's a right. And this is one of the letters that she wrote to us. These are some of the notes of support that she's received from so many people across the country who she's inspired to kind of become activists on this issue. We received lots of media coverage, national and local. These are some local and some LGBT media houses that have covered the story. Jezebel ran a really good long piece about it. There's a quote from Passion to the left, which is for real. Like I said, she would call us saying, I don't know if I'm gonna live till tomorrow morning. And then New York Times ran a really good piece, kind of just talking about the context of this problem, generally speaking, the history of PREA and its non-enforcement, and using Passion's case to kind of bring a human face to the issue. And there's a quote from her as well. Another significant victory, which we just got this week, is this week a judge refused to let the head of TDCJ out of the lawsuit. He'd filed a motion to dismiss, basically saying he's immune, his qualified immunity, basically saying I'm the head, I don't have anything to do with what's going on the ground, why am I in this lawsuit? And it's actually really important that he's being kept in, because from day one what we've said is to change the culture in Texas, it has to start from the top. It goes all the way up to the top, and there is strong evidence that he did in fact know that people like Passion are at increased risk for rape. He was called before the PREA committee to testify about Texas's abysmal record on this. He offered testimony, he offered information, he knew. So we got a really good opinion on that, saying that he has to stay in the case, he has to be subject to discovery about what he knew or didn't know about the policies or the lack thereof that led to Passion being abused. Not only did the court say that, it was a 20-page opinion. It listed all of the horrific things that Passion had to go through, all of her efforts for help that were ignored. It said, basically the judge said it's hard to believe that defendant did not know about this. So, you know, even though the judge didn't come right out and say you knew, like, you know, the writing's on the wall. So it's a really, really good opinion, and we got some press on that this week. So, that was a really kind of whirlwind kind of taking you through it. So yeah, I guess I will move along so that Chinyere can talk about her awesome advocacy on behalf of Ashley Diamond.
Well, thank you. I think the key to any great case is having a great client, and Ashley Diamond is a phenomenal woman. She reached out to, well, in fact, she didn't even reach out to our organization. She filed her own lawsuit, per se, against the Department of Corrections. She filed 2 of them. One said, you're not giving me hormone therapy that I need, you know, to live, and as a result, I'm trying to kill myself every day. You know, I've tried to castrate myself 5 times, and, you know, help. She filed that lawsuit, and then, you know, she filed a second pro se lawsuit saying that, you know, I'm being raped all the time and you don't care, and you know about it and you don't care. And so, you know, my colleagues were on a listserv where cases that sort of survive initial dismissal when, you know, you're filing as an inmate, and they have many, many hurdles to people who file as inmates. We received word about her case. You know, we went to meet her, and we realized that she had this harrowing story, both involving repeated sexual assault and healthcare denial, and lots of indifference at a very high level that suggested this was absolutely a matter of policy and the way that the Georgia Department of Corrections was doing business. And so we worked together to sort of file a new omnibus lawsuit that raised all of those issues and brought them to light. And we had very early and very important successes, including a lot of really groundbreaking news coverage. You know, I don't know, well, I think it might be our case and Passion Star's case that are the 2 cases of Black trans women being on the first page of the New York Times, but we had that and secured that for a client. But we also got the Department of Justice to say, this is completely unconstitutional, what's happening in Georgia, and court, you should grant a motion for preliminary injunction telling them they can't do this anymore. And that is the absolute first time the Department of Justice has sort of gotten involved in trans prison litigation, and they did it to great effect, and their statement is now something being used across the country to notify corrections departments of what their obligations are under the law. And so we're really proud of that. And then Elton John was really upset about what was happening nationally. But in addition, you know, we created such a headache for them that Ashley got a call saying, you know, okay, where do you want to be released? We're releasing you. So Ashley is in the community now. She got a monetary settlement, and Georgia has agreed to change all of its policies on the way transgender inmates access medical care. They've committed to doing, for the first time ever, training among staff on the needs, healthcare and safety needs of transgender prisoners. They've introduced a new prison rape policy that is supposed to more closely mirror federal law. But because we don't really, you know, believe them that much, we also got the Department of Justice to launch its own investigation into Georgia prisons. It's ongoing right now. If you know anyone who's LGBT in Georgia who's incarcerated or been incarcerated recently, you know, the information is available if you contact me. But they're basically asking everyone who knows people in Georgia who might be being affected by housing issues, safety issues, to let them know, because they're gonna put the hammer down, you know? And so we're really excited about that work.
Yeah, I talked about the case of Michelle Noseworthy before briefly, but she was a prisoner in California prison and had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, had been presenting as a woman in the community even before her imprisonment, you know, it was the first time, so we went to court and she was getting hormones, but she wanted desperately gender affirming surgery. And she even had an independent doctor say that this was a medically necessary procedure for her. We were able to actually get a judge to issue a preliminary injunction saying that the Department of Corrections could no longer keep blocking her from getting this surgery. And so it was amazing when it was the first time that a court anywhere had basically told a prison that you have to give gender affirming surgery. A pretty amazing thing happened after we got that ruling. Lo and behold, our client was released from prison. They said, oh, now we have to give prisoners surgery. Yeah, let's just process this release.
So apparently trans prisoners' lawsuits are also a way to abolish prisons.
Well, yeah, and so I was just gonna say too, I mean, even with your case, Chinyere, and the case of Ashley, who was also released from prison. And
8 years early.
Yeah, unfortunately, as with everything else, Texas is like, yeah, no. You can let out all the trans prisoners everywhere else, we're not gonna do that. And Passion was really unjustly denied parole last November, and she was up for parole. It's actually pretty ridiculous. They cited the nature of the crime as the reason. And the person who was more involved in the crimes of Passion was convicted of aggravated kidnapping because her boyfriend at the time decided to hijack a car that they were test driving while she was in the back and asked to be let out, and he wouldn't let her out, and drove her on for a while, and eventually let the salesman out of the car, and then they were kind of tracked down by police. So her boyfriend at the time, who was the architect of this, who is a white cisgender man, was paroled like 3 or so years ago, and Passion remains in prison. So another really galling example of how being Black, trans, and in this case a woman, pretty much puts you at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of justice in every respect, and also how Texas just kind of does its own thing. I mean, we were really hopeful. We're like, well, they're opening up prison gates for transgender litigants left and right. But not so much for Passion so far. But we are working on her next parole review is in November, and we're working on helping her with that and continuing to fight the good fight. I mean, she's an amazingly strong woman, and she gets a lot of inspiration from Ashley Diamond and Noseworthy and all the other trans women who are in the fight as well. So.
Yeah, and just more on that point, but I think that it is an important thing to note that, you know, when we bring, you know, most of these women have actually been released, and when we have been bringing the litigation requiring, you know, whether it be a surgery, hormones, requiring that they be safe from assault, and I think that it's an important point to highlight the purpose of what we're doing, because we're not trying to make prisons, you know, the most trans-friendly place on the planet. You know, it is our goal to get our clients out and to highlight the fact that this institution is so badly broken and unsafe for all people, really, but particularly for trans people, and that we are so pressing the system itself and advocating for our clients in that way. And I think you know, it's important to say that because people are often, you know, I always get the question of, okay, so they're going to give your client hormones and surgeries and all this great stuff, but when they're out, sometimes they can't even get access to that kinds of treatment. And I said, well, you know, part of why we're doing it is to make it such that these systems realize that it is impossible to humanely treat a trans person in prison, and our ultimate goal is release. So it's...
Yeah. So you've heard a lot from our panelists about things that have been done on the legislative level, policy, and also as litigation. So now we want to hear from you. What are your questions? What are your comments about grassroots advocacy strategies? What do you want to know? What do you want to share with us? You want to have a question? So, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Take a mic. Caller, are you there? Yeah. Meet me halfway. Meet me halfway.
So, I have a question. I'm from the great state of Alabama. So my question is, I work in I work at a shelter, and I do direct service. We are the only shelter in Alabama that cater to men, children that are over 13. A lot of shelters do not deal with men that are over 13. They separate them from the family. So we deal with family-based, I guess you could say. It's family-oriented. Our policy is HUD policy. We don't look at marriage. You come in, say like with a companion. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be married. You come in as a family unit. Well, the issue that I'm having is the prison, the pipeline of prison that is dealing with the youth that are being locked up from running away or in situations that are not compromising to them or that is detrimental to their living situation. And some of them are transgender. Alabama is getting a little better, but the more we change, the more it stays the same. So my issue is having access. I'm in a community. I'm from Birmingham. Birmingham is 83% black. We are divided, segregation, divided by railroads. So how do you have access to a community that is mostly African American and Hispanic that is governed by the broken window theory?
I feel like I should kick it to you since
I get the hard question. Well, that's thank you for your work in this area, and I'm in Montgomery, and so I think it's great that we have Alabama in the room here. I think that I think there's two things embedded in your question. One seems to be sort of how do we work within Black and Latino communities around LGBT issues, and the other seems to be sort of maybe how to approach shelter housing for trans folks. I'll take the easy question first, or easier question. I think for housing for trans folks, HUD is working right now on final regulations that would clarify that in in a shelter environment where there's sex segregation, that the way you approach housing trans youth, trans adults, is by their gender identity. And without any discussion about the sex they're assigned at birth, without giving some primacy to what's on their, what gender markers on their identification. And so that's really important. I think that when those regulations are final, it'll sort of be the law to do things in a certain way, and that should help the conversation where it's a difficult conversation currently. And what I'll say just on a more personal level about how to work within Black communities on LGBT issues, just remember that our communities are resilient. A lot of the ideas we have about homophobia, transphobia were brought into the community from outside, right? I mean, Native American communities have two-spirit, people that they've embraced for decades, right? African cultures have something similar. And so, yes, religion has played a very shaping role. Judeo-Christian, European religions brought to our communities have played a very shaping role in sort of our ability to embrace LGBT persons, but there's still a lot of capacity there. And I say that as a Black lesbian who's of half Nigerian descent, who had a bunch of Nigerians at my wedding a year ago, you know, who would have never thought they would ever be in the room and ever tolerate sort of what I am, you know, and people who, you know, are liking my post about Ashley Diamond, you know, who would have never thought, you know, that this would be the issue. And so I do think that we should just give our communities a chance, you know, to show that they can stand up for us. And I think there's a lot of evidence that they are, you know, even if the conversations aren't easy.
We're going to take one more question because we're wrapping up. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to echo what Chinyere was saying and to say, you know, we have some awesome colleagues at Lambda Legal who are doing community education work. My colleague Geneva Musgrave and others are working on issues of family acceptance in communities of color, but also working to change the narrative along the lines that Chinyere is talking about. A lot of times the narrative has somewhat racist tones that make it seem like communities of color are somehow inherently unaccepting and things like that. And I think a lot of the work that we're trying to do is to break that down and to get to the nub of, first of all, the origin of those attitudes that Chinyere was talking about, but also about the fact that a lot of times in our communities, in communities of color, people are faced with so many issues that they're trying to deal with. And you know, this applies both in communities of color here, but also, you know, in other countries, like I'm originally from Jamaica. There's so many issues that are going on that are not being addressed and that are caused by, you know, racist, colonialist, you know, injustice that are not being targeted and that make it hard for communities to be accepting, to think about, to grapple with some of these issues. And I think, you know, what some of the research and some of the activism that some of our colleagues are doing shows that when you start to address some of those issues and make that space for folks to be able to engage, you do start to see an increase in acceptance.
Very briefly, do you think that the Department of Justice is doing all that it can? How have they helped you in this fight?
I can speak to that a little bit. I will say that the federal government is a complicated animal, and in the same moment that we've seen them standing up for Ashley Diamond, you know, a Black trans woman, you know, other parts of the Department of Justice have been making life really hard for Chelsea Manning, who's also a trans inmate who's been looking for gender dysphoria affirming healthcare. But I think in our case, we have identified a number of allies within the administration who did things like, for instance, call me after I filed my lawsuit and say, do you think if we file a brief saying what George is doing is really, really bad, it'll help you? And I was like, oh yeah. You know, and then the brief got filed and they did a press release, and then suddenly we have 100 news stories, you know, in the New York Times and other places about how transgender inmates across the country have a right to gender dysphoria care, right? So that was pretty huge, you know, and when I realized that they were taking steps to do things like push Ashley out of prison, which, in case you didn't perceive the possibly sinister undertone, I mean, the reason that's a favorite strategy is that it makes lawsuits kind of grind to a halt, right? Because if someone's not in jail, you can't be arguing about improve the jail conditions for this person, right? So there was a sinister element to it. I mean, I feel pretty happy I can say I got someone out of prison, but I mean, you know, what we did at that point in time is write letters to the DOJ and say, we think that, you know, these issues are important and someone needs to be monitoring them and monitoring the policy implementation. And lo and behold, they're now launching the first ever investigation about LGBT, you know, prisoners' rights and treatment in any given state, and it's in Georgia, and it's, you know, because of our case.
As always, we really don't have enough time. This is like 24/7, 365 work. But again, let's thank our panelists for coming, and thank you all.
Also give it up for our presenter, Simone, who jumped in at the last minute. She's done an extraordinary job.
And most of all, I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing, for being involved, for having the heart and the spirit to do this particular work. As you see, there are a lot of organizations out here who are doing the work on the legislative and policy level. Please reach out to anyone here at their organizations. We're willing to be